Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me at this amazing summit, this gathering of so many people committed to recognizing, honoring, and taking forward the work of wonderful women and those who travel with us in our efforts to end sex discrimination and gender inequality. I know we gather at a time of terrible tragedy and pain for too many people, and I would like to acknowledge and recognize that many of us are feeling really difficult things and terrible pain as we go through the pandemic. The pandemic has also, I think, forced us to rethink, to reorganize how we work, our priorities in life. And it's part of that reflection, that period of contemplation, that I think is full of potential for re-energizing, for perhaps redirecting the work we do to build a world that works for women. It's a term I use a lot. It's one that I think reflects that the world certainly doesn't work for women right now. It hasn't through our lifetimes. It didn't for our mothers and grandmothers. And I believe that it is in their honor that we must take that work forward. Many women before us have spoken, have disrupted, have challenged, have outed, have drawn attention to the ways in which gender inequality and sex discrimination and all forms of inequality have poisoned, have damaged, and have taken lives away from the world that should be a better place. And the latest wave of that, I argue, has been the Me Too movement. It is the first and only global movement we have ever seen that has fought sexual abuse in the way that it has, with such power and solidarity. I talk about it as a spontaneous uprising, a global uprising. Many people believe it to be celebrity-driven or about Hollywood or about the USA. But yes, there was something that came from the USA in terms of the 2017 explosion. But the work against sexual violence has been much longer history, and it has involved many activists in quiet, underfunded, precariously run organizations that have had precious little support. And so it's they who have made this possible. It's the existence of laws that has made people think this is not okay. Laws that say discrimination shouldn't happen. Laws that say violence is not acceptable and is a crime. And sexual harassment in many places has had laws to address it. So that's what's happened. It's been on the back of those. But also, those in Hollywood who spoke about it were not powerful at the time, or rich or famous at the time that they were abused. Quite the opposite. They were young, entering a profession in which they wished to succeed. And so I want to acknowledge the international reach and the power of Me Too that involved over 25 million impressions on Twitter in 2 years, between 2017 and 2019, using the Me Too hashtag. Isn't it really clear that people, and the majority of them were women, came together, never meeting each other, never knowing each other, and unlikely ever to be in the same room, to say, look, this has happened to me. Me Too itself is a term of connection. Those connections are valuable and special. But they came together and they exploded on the world, saying, look at what's happened to me. This is what's happened to me. This is who did it. This is the consequence of it. I will not put up with this any longer. I will not acquiesce to sexual harassment any longer. And you, all of you in power, you need to do something about this. It was phenomenal. And it spread everywhere. There were massive engagements from the US, yes, but also from Argentina, Spain, Japan, India. Nigeria actually had the highest engagement with Twitter using the Me Too hashtag across Africa. But South Africa has taught us a lot too, and I want to come back to that towards the end. Let me just say, I think the Me Too movement has been phenomenally impactful. It has really changed the way in which we talk about abuse. It has really changed the expectations we have about what happens and whether we should live with it the way we have always sort of either been told to or know quietly we are expected to just take sexual abuse as a part of life and get on with our lives despite it being there. Saying no, they're saying no. Everybody's saying no. It won't do anymore. They have spoken at great risk. Some women have been subjected to defamation cases. Some have lost their jobs. Some have been kicked out of college. Let me just give you one example of the potential losses that come from raising your voice. One young schoolgirl, Nusrat, in Bangladesh, outed the sexual abuse she had from her head teacher, and she went to the police. But then she was lured back to her school and she was killed for speaking out about it. Let's not underestimate the bravery and the courage it takes to denounce, to be a thorn in the side of other people, and to hold institutions to account. So let's just be clear. What is sexual harassment? It is a creature of gender equality. That's the expression I've used. It is a human rights violation, and it can come in two types. It's basically an expectation of sexual servicing, or the promulgation, the maintenance of a sexual atmosphere in relationships that should not be sexual. It tends to come in two forms: quid pro quo, which involves an exchange. Sexually service me and I'll give you the job you want, or I'll get you a promotion, or I'll get you on the work travel you want, or I'll get your pay, which you are entitled to anyway, but you'll get it. The second type is called hostile environment sexual harassment, where the exchange isn't required, but the sexual environment can be quite intimidating, can be very humiliating, and it expresses inequality between those who are being abused and those who are abusers. And yes, it's a creature of gender inequality, absolutely, but it intersects with all forms of discrimination that we know, whether that's disability, racial identity, whether it's age, whether it's sexual orientation. They come together in different ways to shape who is abused and who is excused being an abuser. Some of the things that I think we need to say that we don't say enough is that who is shaped by those dimensions of inequality is very much influenced by the histories and legacies of slavery and colonial adventure. So some bodies, physical bodies, have been rendered almost incapable of being harmed by abuse that is done to them. So through slavery, bodies that were taken from Africa to the Americas and then to the USA, those are bodies that were owned by others. Those were bodies that were raped and enslaved and forcibly impregnated. Those are bodies that could not be seen by others as being harmed, just as commodities to be used. Likewise, colonialism across the world, colonial adventures across the world have shaped and framed Native women's bodies, primarily black bodies, brown bodies of women, as less than those who colonized, less than the value of those who invaded. And those legacies continue to shape who is targeted, who is believed when they speak about abuse, who is not believed, and who is believed. The people who are abusers tend to be those who are powerful in organizations, and that usually it is dominated by men. In many places, particularly in international work, is dominated by white men. And so issues of race and able-bodiedness and so on are absolutely pertinent to those patterns that we see around them. And we talk about them as structural inequality. They're not about random microaggressions that randomly pick certain people to be abused. No, there are patterns. It's mostly women who are abused, and it's mostly men who abuse. This is absolutely about gender. So I don't have time to share with you lots of data, but there is work from across the world that shows that sexual harassment is probably the most common form of abuse experienced by women across their lifetimes. And were we to measure it, and we don't at the moment, were we to measure it globally, we would have a much higher rate than the 1 in 3 figure that we use to talk about violence against women. It isn't measured, so we don't have that comparative data, but where we have studies here and there, we see figures that go up to 80% of women, 90% of women who experience sexual harassment in their lifetimes. If we did that, we would know this is also a pandemic. This is also a global tragedy, and how many women's lives are affected by this, how much harm and how much burden do they carry through their lives for entering university, for being at school, or entering their life of work through experiences of harassment, abuse, and learning that this is what you put up with to get through to where you want to be, or anywhere close to it, or even not getting there, but this is part of life. So first of all, I'd be cautious about using the figure 1 and 3 for women who are abused. It's much higher than that. Secondly, let's understand that various forms of inequality, as I've mentioned, serve to shape who is abused and who gets away with abuse. Let me also say that women talk about sexual harassment all the time to each other. Don't you know? So say you're in a university or in a school and you're going to see somebody who has a reputation for abusing. Well, somebody might say, well, you're going to see him on your own? Okay, be careful. I'll be here. Maybe I'll just sit out there outside the office if you need me, or I'll wait outside the factory. So just to make sure you're okay. I think women speak about this all the time, and if you make it safe for them to speak, they will tell you, but they don't report. And that is an interesting disjuncture at the moment, when there is almost a compulsion. Tell us what's happened to you, otherwise we can't do anything to address it. Well, actually, why will people trust systems that have failed to place them at the center, or that have failed to deliver justice to them? And I'm very unapologetic about talking about accountability and redress as issues of justice. Violence, sexual harassment and abuse are issues of justice, and we need to make sure that those who've been abused shape what we understand justice to be for them, and how it's delivered, and how they are treated in processes that involve them. So let's look at issues of trust. Let's look at issues of systems that claim to be victim-centered, or that claim zero tolerance, but actually are very harmful to those who seek to use them to seek justice. Let's also be clear that addressing issues of violence within institutions, whether it's a company, whether it's a university, whether it's a factory, the UN, an NGO, it doesn't matter. These are issues that are going to be really painful and be difficult to deal with. Let's dispense with defensiveness. Let's dispense with thinking of an organization as only reflected by its seniors or its stars or its most powerful people. An organization is made up of everybody, from the cleaners to those who look after the toilets for us, to those who look after the computers, who fix the machines in factories, not just the people who are managers and leaders. And if we think of our identity in a more holistic, inclusive way, then maybe we will take the welfare of those at the bottom more seriously and treat them with the respect and the equality that is their due. Let me just say here that equality and non-discrimination are not only nice things to have, and perhaps something that we aim for in the future if we can, but they're actually legal obligations. There is a law, which I'm sure all of you know, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which says there is an obligation to end discrimination against women. And sexual harassment is a form of discrimination. Like I've said, it's primarily women who are targeted. It's primarily men who are perpetrators. So that discrimination has to end, and the urgency to do that has been set out also in the Sustainable Development Goals, which promise the elimination of violence by 2030, and which also require the collection of data on sexual harassment, which we still don't have. So let me just clarify also that sexual harassment runs a whole range of behaviours, from looks to words to contact to sexual assault to rape. I'm very troubled, by the way, that many people think about rape or sexual assault as something more serious than sexual harassment. No, it's part of the range of sexual harassment that can take place in the workplace or the educational institution, all of which needs to be ended. And I include looks. Sometimes people don't know why I include looks. It's because if you're in an office, in a meeting, if you're in a summit, if you're on a factory line, if you're working in somebody's home as a domestic worker, if somebody spends all their time ogling and staring at your breasts or your backsides, that is quite an intimidatory process. That is about a form of sexual harassment, which we must also recognize also. So let's honor the work and the bravery of the activists, the movement builders who ensured that sexual harassment is on the agenda in public discourse and public policy in a way it never has been. Let's keep this work going. And in that respect, I'd just like to suggest a couple of things, if I may, as I end my presentation to you. One is keep the momentum going and understand that some people are risk takers and they are taking huge risks. Don't walk away from them. Don't denounce them, even if you disagree with how they're doing things. Or if I disagree with how they're doing things, I might say, okay, but they were right to put it on the agenda. And they have cleared the space for us to have the discussions that we wouldn't have had they not done that brave work at the beginning. Secondly, sexual harassment, violence and abuse, inequality in the workplace. These are all forms of discrimination and inequality. And we should not think of them as trivial, as inevitable, or as unavoidable. They are not. They have to end, and we must talk about ending and elimination and eradication. Let's keep those words in our mind. That means that we have to deal with big underlying issues about how we think about men, how we think about women, how we think about sexual engagement. It's not the case that men have a right of sexual entitlement to women's bodies. It's not the case that that's inevitable. Let's not behave as if it were so. Let's not talk to people as if it were so. Let's not aim for the very popular low-hanging fruit that many of us talk about. This is about changing how we think as well as how we behave. And so we have to be in it for the long haul. Let me also say that we are in a time now where there is a danger of withdrawing from discussion and debate with each other if we disagree. That's entirely unhelpful for our collective struggles and progress. We have to talk to each other. We have to discuss different ways of viewing the world so that we can bring our best efforts to bear in collective struggle. Let's not have debate or disagreement badged as hate, which then has to be censored. I can disagree with you till the cows come home. What an odd English expression. I can disagree with you for day after day after day, but still want to talk to you and see what we can do together and see points of common contact. Let's make sure those connections stay open. And my last comment to you, if I may, is to acknowledge and to look forward to more leadership from the South and from Africa in particular. About 20 years ago, I was involved in writing the first shadow report under the law I mentioned to you just now, CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And the shadow report is something that is written by non-government actors, so women's movements, academics, NGOs, etc. And we were writing one on violence against women to go alongside the official government report on discrimination against women. We hadn't done that in the UK before. It was a novelty, and we did a great job of pulling together the women's sector and writing a shadow thematic report on violence. But because we hadn't done it in this country before, we looked elsewhere for guidance and for examples and for inspiration. And one of the reports that I was one of 3 authors of the report, one of the places I found the most inspiration and help was the South African reports that you had all submitted from there. And so I want to ensure that in a lot of these discussions where leadership is seen to come from the West or the North, that we ensure that we recognise efforts elsewhere. The other thing I want to pay tribute to and ask for more of is your total shutdown that you had recently. I think it was last year or the year before. That phenomenal organising and agitation that happened in South Africa around violence against women was truly inspirational. You know what I'd love to see is a global shutdown. A global shutdown that says discrimination, inequality and violence are to be no more, and we will not cooperate in these systems of inequality. We will withdraw our engagement with them until you listen to us, or maybe not until you listen to us, but for a time, so that you notice and pay attention to us. So as we come through and out of the pandemic in this time of reflection and effort to creating a better world, I hope that we can join our efforts, look to you for leadership, and join our hands in solidarity to make that better world that works for women. Thank you and good luck with the rest of the summit.